welcome to the Dev Method. My name is Ricky. Today is a unique video. We're actually going to talk a little bit about the past week. There is a developers conference known as the Worldwide Developers Conference, and it is put on by Apple. So I thought I'd give you a fresh perspective from a developer about the conference, how it went, and what my general feelings are, my favorites. And then we'll talk a little bit at the end about the future and maybe what your next steps as a developer could be. I was actually pretty impressed with the WWDC event. As a developer, normally we would apply to get a ticket. And then we spend an enormous amount of money to buy the ticket, and then another enormous chunk of change would actually go to flights, hotel rooms, and then our own room and board, as lunch would be provided and maybe some stuff during the day, like little snacks or some breakfast. But normally you would pay for like dinner and stuff on your own. There are a couple of noticeable differences though, so I thought we would talk about some of those things. So my first feeling that I want to express is that I think the presentations were actually a lot better and they benefited from being pre-recorded. Not saying that the previous presentations were poor or lack of quality, or maybe the people couldn't speak, but there was a lot less dramatic pauses or a lot less longer pauses. Maybe because they had time to rehearse and they could get exactly the right shot. I think that's the benefit of doing a lot of that work up front. But then it also seemed like maybe there's less pressure to be live for the presenters. It's not something that's a major difference with being at a WWDC live or watching them streamed live. But it does make a difference. There's a little enhancement on that. The other thing I'd like to point out is that the developer presentations were actually a lot shorter. There was like 8-minute, 5-minute videos, and then some that were a lot longer, closer to an hour or just under. It's interesting how that plays into my mental capacity, thinking like, okay, well, if all these videos get released at 12 or whatever your time zone is, you can choose which ones you want to watch first. And if you only have a little bit of time before your next meeting, because we're all working at the same time that WWDC is happening, then you could choose which ones you want to watch, and you only have 8 minutes. We'll watch the 8-minute or 5-minute video. So that was kind of cool. And they're small and bite-sized, so you can actually like revisit them and go back. Another one of my favorites was actually the Twitter atmosphere, which was kind of cool to see a lot of different Apple engineers not only saying that that's the company that they work for, but showing which videos to watch, what they think would be great, something that they probably worked on or that one of their friends is presenting. It was actually really great because there were really cool ways to like meet new developers or just see who they are, people outside of Apple. And it was funny because a lot of people would like make their own jokes. I think there was one about there's this short video about the one app that is about ordering soup, and they put some sort of remix video on it. It was pretty funny. If I find it, I'll link it in the show notes below, but if not, go out on Twitter, look for WWDC and soup or something like that. So that brings me to some of my next stuff was the favorite parts of WWDC. So some of the favorites that I have are not going to be the favorites for everybody. There's just so much. A lot of it builds up to that initial keynote. We get a bunch of information and then we have to pick and choose what it is we like. One of my favorites this year, and I can't speak for everybody, but one of my favorites this year was that we didn't necessarily have all these different demos of applications from other developers showing hey, ARKit actually works, or MLKit is really cool and you got to be using it. It kind of feels more like a marketing push that you have to start using those for your app to be successful, when in reality that's not totally true. Although it's definitely advantageous for you as a developer to dig into those technologies and exploit them the best you can, because I think ARKit is probably one of the best development kits that you can actually have on any kind of mobile device. Especially in that space right now in the history of computing and mobile development. But the other thing that I thought was one of my favorites too was the developer Mac app. And there's a developer app, it's brand new this year, but there's a developer app for the iPhone, the iPad, and then also for the Mac. The Mac one I think was the last one that we all got. And You know, at first, if you're not a developer, I'm not really sure what use you could really get out of this app. I mean, it has developer in the title, so it's probably specifically for developers. But I think out of the three, the phone, the iPad, and the Mac app, I actually really like the Mac app. It has essentially just, one thing you could think about it as is like, it's a great way to demonstrate Catalyst and the technology and like where you can get right now. It is definitely like a Catalyst app. I'm sure with the new updates in iOS 14 and Catalyst moving to its next version, that there's going to be even more controls and more look and feel of Mac OS that you can put into the developer app. I like the organization on the left-hand side where you get to pick like your favorites or the WWDC, look at all the videos. There was a search there too, so I think that was like my favorite because then I can get the recaps about what happened that day, and then maybe a video that I wouldn't have watched. The recap kind of like said, oh, or the recap kind of made me feel, oh, that's maybe something that I want to look at. That's something that I might be interested in seeing, or even just as a demonstration purpose, not to say that I'm actually going to develop it in the future. I'd say that my favorite sessions were anything with Swift and Swift UI. And, you know, I, again, can't speak for every developer, but for me specifically, you know, I love working directly with the code. I love creating things. So the Swift UI videos are all about like, what's that next step? So I might have pushed the technology to its limit, or I might have had some shortcomings that I found that I didn't quite like or agree with in the way it was made or designed, you know, designed at the API level, at the actual code level. And this is our opportunity to actually see what's new. This is very similar to like, if you think about equipment you might have in a physical space. You might, like, let's say, I don't know, you do landscaping. You're gonna need some clippers, you're gonna need the lawnmower, pulling the cord to start the lawnmower. All those things are basically like the tools that you get in Swift and Swift UI. So that's what's really important. So those were some of my favorites. The app main inside of Swift UI and being able to start with an app completely with Swift UI and not having to integrate UIKit. Although probably the reality is you're gonna have to integrate some parts of UIKit into Swift UI, but just showing that app main is there, it's really a way of Apple letting you know that this is the future, this is where they wanna take everything. And it's also good to see too that even with the introduction of new Swift UI APIs, there's also just AppKit and UIKit enhancements as well. I'm not an AppKit person, so I haven't actually developed in an AppKit only application. But now I can see, because we're enhancing some of the platform and what's there currently, you might have an application that's totally built on UIKit, and that's okay. It's actually a great foundation. You can keep moving it forward. If you want to incorporate Swift UI, you can do that in small parts of your app, or you can start from scratch. It's really up to you and what's best for your team that you want to make that decision. But anybody looking out there that's not a developer and watching this video, that's, you know, something to consider. Your team might actually ask you, they might be excited about this new stuff and they want to rewrite their app. Now, rewriting apps is a whole nother topic, or rewrites in general, and there's a lot of opinions on that. My first thought is rewrites are scary because you don't know how many bugs have already been fixed, but I think the idea that these APIs are continually evolving, I think we can expect that next year Swift UI will even just get even that much better. So that's a great thing. That's an awesome thing. And then of course, I think probably the shared favorite, it's kind of like the one more thing in the presentation that they had for developers was the move from Intel to Apple processors on the Mac. And you might think like, oh, in watching that, if you're a developer, you understand absolutely everything that they said, but that is not the case, not necessarily for me. I can get an idea of what they're talking about. Basically, they're just showing us that it's magic and that it's just gonna keep working. That's definitely not the case, I would imagine, for all sorts of projects, like especially projects that are not completely written in something like Swift or completely written with just UIKit. If there's some sort of other dependencies, it's going to be interesting. Like, who knows when that first Mac comes along that actually has the Apple processor in it. I think that's when we'll get really good reviews about like what applications and what companies were able to actually make their stuff compatible in time for a Mac like that. but definitely a great place to start. So I would say some of the things as a developer that were showstoppers that were really great to see, definitely the iOS simulator full screen. I don't know if you've ever tried it before, but if you have your code full screen on your monitor and then you want to put the simulator right next to it, that's not something you can actually do right now. It would be great to do that. And Xcode previews with SwiftUI kind of gives us that. But you know, just for a long time in the history, you'd want to have like your code editor and your simulator side by side. And it wasn't really shown in a presentation, and I haven't necessarily seen a video of it, but that was one of the things I picked up from a tweet that somebody had. So that I thought that was really cool, so I can't wait to try that. Another one of my videos that I would call out would be the Swift logging and what's new in Swift logging. I thought that was super helpful. I can't tell you how many times that you know, something as simple as logging and, you know, trying to debug and find errors, that is something that a lot of teams just kind of reinvent. Some teams pick up frameworks that might help them and aid them in a particular way to do it. And you know, you have to be careful about logging sensitive information, especially depending on your app. Like, I don't know, if you were Chase Bank or something like that, you wouldn't want to put the account numbers in your logs, right? So that video actually goes over it pretty well about how you could obfuscate some of that sensitive information, but then also how you can benefit as the developer and try and debug your apps. So I thought that was a great video. I learned a lot. Also really totally ready for widgets on iOS. And I don't mean necessarily as the user. I mean about the development of it. It is actually pure SwiftUI. I'm not saying SwiftUI is like that was obvious choice for that type of technology, but I think it's a great move by Apple to do something like that because you get to try SwiftUI. If your code is not in SwiftUI right now and you're like even in an Objective-C project, but now you want to add widgets to your project, you're going to have to learn SwiftUI, which kind of brings me to a con, but we'll talk about that later. Like, there's just a lot to learn now. Real quick side note, I just want to get rid of any preconceived notions that like, oh, the betas are out, so like all developers download the beta now. That's not always a wise choice. There's definitely a lot of developers that will download the beta and try it out, but they'll put it on their own personal phones. And that's a risky move to make. You could really mess up your computer or really mess up your phone or iPad or even your watch. And you might have to like erase all your stuff. And even worse, your device might not be operational, which could be the worst part of it. And you might not be able to recover from that. And you have to, you know, you're out a whole device. You got to buy a brand new Apple device. So yeah, preconceived notion of developers just download the betas and start going for it. No, like for me, I did not download the latest Mac OS. Not necessarily because I'm afraid that it would be buggy, but I'm currently in a project right now, so I really rely on my Mac to be working operationally and not just for iOS development. You know, there's some backend code that I have to write as well. There's other pieces of technology that I depend on, so there's even other apps that I depend on, and they might not be compatible automatically in the new operating system. So that's why I do not go for something like that. You could actually download the newest Xcode and try out some of the new Xcode features, although not all of them are like enabled or activated because you're on Catalina, the previous OS. But I just want to clear up that misconception real quick. So all in all, the future, the outlook, like what do you do next as a developer, or what would your developers do if you're, you know, a project manager or somebody who's working with developers? Like, what is the next step? I think right away, if you haven't done this already, but you know, probably something to rinse and repeat this every summer after these new announcements are made and the new betas are available, you should right away just get a test device and start running your app on it, even with the old build tools. If you can get the new build tools and build it with that, you know, that's another thing to try as well. But you want to make sure that when iOS 14 comes out, your app is going to be ready for that. And if you find issues, you need to then, you know, report them to Apple. You need to put a bug report out. That's the only way that they're going to know about it. You can't just, you know, use the bystander effect and just assume another developer is going to log the defect for you. You have to let them know your feedback. You also have to let them know not necessarily your feedback on bugs, but maybe even, this is not as negotiable, but you want to give some sort of feedback on the design. Like right now, like if you activate Siri in iOS 14, you can't touch the content behind it. Like the first touch makes Siri go away. So even though Siri doesn't cover the entire screen and you can see the content behind it, you actually can't interact with the content that's behind it. Now, I'm not saying myself that I would want that, but that's an example where if your use case and your user experience gets to a point in the design where something's not working as expected, you should definitely speak up and let your voice be heard. But I think the refresh of the macOS is great. Just the design itself, that's definitely more of like a consumer thing, but it's nice to keep developers fresh too, because our virtual setup on that desktop is very much like a physical office, and rearranging furniture, especially if you're at home nowadays with shelter in place, or if you're at home with quarantine because of the pandemic, changing up your background picture or rearranging your furniture, and in this case like a new operating system with a little bit of a different look, just kind of, it's a small thing, but it kind of adds to like our atmosphere of like developing and stuff like that. So might feel a little bit more inspired to keep chugging along with our applications and our development. I also think the developer app is something to look out for. If you haven't seen it, I don't know if it was a hint or if it was, maybe a lot of people have already watched it, but if you watch the recap of day 5, they do tell you to, stick around in the developer app because there'll be more in the future. And the developer app was pretty active, especially on the push notifications. So if you haven't turned those on, or if you need to turn those on, go to your settings, turn them on, because there's going to be some additional content in there. I think it's going to be a great way for you to communicate with Apple as well. Although we don't really have like a direct connect, things like that. Like, wouldn't it be great if we could like file a bug directly in the developer app? That'd be kind of cool. Maybe we could like tag the video where we say, hey, you say it's supposed to work like this, but it doesn't. And then maybe, maybe that's a different app. So maybe that's a link to a different app. I don't know, but that would be kind of cool. Another thing I think that would be really good too is just to continue putting out more videos like you did with the WWDC sessions. I thought they were great. The text was legible, the graphs were great, the animations were good. I don't know how long that takes. I don't know what type of time commitment that is, but I think it's great to come back to an 8-minute video about something rather than a whole presentation talk and trying to get through all the clapping and stuff like that. Like, I think these session videos are going to be pretty key for learning and unlocking that learning. But another thing too is like, I didn't really have a way to communicate with other developers through the app. I guess like I can go to Twitter, and I've already made a lot of those connections myself and have been following people. So I kind of have like my own feed, custom feed made through Twitter. But it's not, Twitter's not a place just for developers, it's for everybody. So I will get distracted, and I probably will like all of a sudden not be looking at development stuff and looking at some other post from somebody else, maybe about what they ate that night, but maybe it's a dad joke. I don't know. That's just something to consider. How do we bring developers together in that app? And I could definitely tell, for the future, Swift UI is the way to go. However, it's probably one of the toughest things to do right now is iOS development. Not saying there's other things that are easier. I think there's definitely parts of application development and software development that are probably easier than iOS development. I wouldn't call iOS development the easiest. And seeing Swift UI integrated into other parts of the operating systems, especially the new features like widgets, I think it's actually probably it's asking a lot of the developer to not only learn Swift, but learn Swift UI and then learn AppKit or UIKit. You kind of have to know all three. You're going to have to touch a little bit of them as you go between some of these different features, or when you're trying to fulfill your requirements on your project. There's a lot of apps out there that do not, like, they start with the basics, the components, like a button or a toolbar button or something like that, or scroll something. But you typically have a requirement to fill in like your own color, or fill in like your own shape, or fill in like your own custom look and feel to the app. And it's going to require you to dig a little deeper into some of the older technologies like UIKit. And then also, if you're going to be writing it in Swift UI, you might not have that support in Swift UI. It might not work out quite the way that you intend. So you'll have to actually dig down deep to UIKit. And therefore, you'll be working with APIs that are really kind of like ported from Objective-C. Like they're originally written there and they're still written in Objective-C, but there's a slight naming bridge and some other technology bridges to move that stuff over. So if you're getting a little lost as a developer, even watching this, just know that like, yeah, we get all these really cool new things, but I wouldn't say you'd have to forget everything that you learned last year. This is like another building block to the next phase. But yeah, it's getting a little tough to learn all this new stuff, which kind of brings me to another thing here. So the privacy, I thought privacy was really cool. It's definitely your responsibility as a developer to speak up in your team or in your company about privacy, especially if you don't see good privacy practices being used. If you are collecting and mining data, if you're uncomfortable with that, you need to speak up. And I think, with some of the updates here, like using the camera will show an orange dot. I remember the Facebook app, there was somebody saying that they somehow found like the camera might have been used, but they're not really sure, because if you put the camera on screen and replay that video back on the display, what's coming from the camera, it's really not a way to know if it's like being recorded or not. But it's something to think about with this new update, is it shows that orange dot. So like, I don't know, if you're scrolling through your feed and you see an orange dot up there, that's probably a really good indication that that app is using your camera and it's somehow maybe even recording you. I don't know what it does after that, but I think that's great. There's also like the copy and paste. There's a couple of YouTube videos out there right now where like, even like TikTok, you just go to the app and it says, oh, copied something from Instagram or from, Safari or something like that. And that's a little weird. So that's great. That's a cool feature. But yeah, be ready to react to that as a developer. So I think the next thing to take a look at, and this is the last part here, is what is next for developers. So if you are the project manager, or if you work with developers, or you're the developer yourself, after learning all this stuff, or after watching a bunch of the videos, the next thing I think you need to do is it's a lot. First of all, don't panic. You can always go back to the videos and watch them again. So that's great. It's kind of like just stepping back into last week and look at it again and review. I think relearning something is always easier than learning something for the first time. So just be aware that, the relearning part, that's one of the next phases here. Another thing you should do though this weekend is don't go overboard. Like if you haven't watched any of the videos, great. Now is the time for you to get caught up. But if you've already watched a bunch of them, whether at night or during the day, give yourself a break, because you're formulating new ideas, your brain's working in a new way, it's making connections that it hasn't made before. Taking a break is going to be really beneficial, not only for your physical health and your mental health, but it's going to be really great for your creativity. You need that break to have your mind take a rest, and then when it comes back, it's going to be even stronger, and you're going to be able to not only relearn faster and better, but you're going to make better applications. You're going to make better software. The next thing that I'd like to say that goes right along with that is, make sure you're eating healthy, because, this could have been a really draining week for you if you were doing work for 8 hours and then also looking at all the sessions and then 8 hours the next day. So not only take a break, but, make sure you're eating, make sure you're getting that nutrition so that your brain is functioning at full capacity. You want full creative capacity. And then get rest, sleep. If you were staying up late watching all those videos, maybe don't do that tonight. Just go to bed, take a nap right now. I don't know, pause the video, take a nap, come back, watch me later, recap my video. Yeah. So anyways, thanks for watching. If you guys have any other questions or comments, just leave them down below. I'll try and post as many helpful links that I see fit in the description. Yeah, so thanks for watching. Have a good one.